Hi, all of you wonderful scuba divers out there. Welcome to the Scuba Dive Magazine podcast, where I break down the latest scuba diving news and things that have piqued my interest over the previous week. This week on the podcast, another titan of extreme scuba diving has departed. Hal Watts has died at the age of 88. You'll probably have experienced him in some way. He was one of the people that coined the term plan the dive and dive the plan. All hands on deck for the Great Barrier Reef baby boom. Last week saw the a special moon, which meant that all of the coral reefs just started reproducing all at the same time, so that's pretty cool. Scuba divers who use personal locator beacons are being urged to take part in a consultation on a Coastguard proposal, and the body of a scuba diver who went missing off Cornwall on the 22nd of September has been found on a beach about 15 kilometers from his last known location. So yeah, the first news story is a sad passing of Hal Watts, who died at the age of 88 in Ocala, Florida on the 7th of December. He had retired from diving following a series of 8 strokes over recent years. Watts made his name through deep air diving. Although he started in the sport in the early 1960s, there was little choice for recreational divers wanting to go deep, but to do so on air, and just learnt to manage the process as safely as possible. To that end, Watts, who became known as Mr. Scuba, is also associated with coining the best-known saying in the sport, "Plan your dive and dive your plan." This, he says, was simply adapted from the motto that he heard as a young private pilot: plan your flight and fly your plan. When he had started scuba diving, it was normal for divers to take to the water without exchanging any words about what they intended to do whilst underwater. So yeah, he decided to make a difference to that. He was born on the 10th of June 1935 and discovered scuba diving 20 years later whilst working for his master's degree at John Marshall Law School in Atlanta, Georgia. He didn't actually follow up on that single dive until 6 years later, by which time he'd moved to Orlando, Florida. He was noticed a small ad for used scuba gear in a newspaper in 1961, and he decided on a whim just to buy it. The seller suggested that Watts read the US Navy diving manual before meeting him at a hotel swimming pool for a practical demonstration of the equipment. His first open water dive using the equipment was to a depth of about 15 meters in mid-February 1962 in Crystal River, where he was reported being spooked by a manatee, but by that time that he was hooked on his in this new sport. So later that year, he set up a dive shop called Florida Divers Supply, or FDS, from where he started training cave divers, and from 1963 issuing the first FDS cave diver certification cards. In 1967, Watts set an official world record for deep air dives, reaching the depth of 119 meters, and in 1970 set a cave depth record of 127 meters. That year, he also published the first instructor manual for extended range deep diving and commissioned Ned Deloche to produce the film Deep Diving in Wakula Springs. He would go on to train 6 other world record deep air divers, including his daughter Scarlett, who set a women's record of 129 meters in 1999. And in the same year, British diver Mark Andrews also set the men's record of 158 metres under Watts' tuition. His boast was that as of the date of 9/9/99, he had guided 55 divers to reach depths between 100 and 127 metres on air with no accidents occurring, which is pretty incredible. Watts has also been credited with coming up with the idea of the octopus regulator, which he developed with Scuba Pro and Sportsways. So yeah, before that you just had a single second stage and you just buddy breathed. Now he thought, hey, you know what? Why don't we bring down a second one, which does make sense and is the most common diving regulator set up today. Hal Watts leaves behind his 5th wife, Jan, to whom he had been married for 22 years, daughters Kristen Stanford and Scarlett Watts, grandson Ryan Stanford, and great-grandson Wyatt. Tourism operators and local reef industry worked throughout the night during the most remarkable spawning event on the planet, learning cutting-edge coral restoration techniques to help boost healthy coral numbers. The annual coral spawning event, which was triggered by the November full moon, sees the Great Barrier Reef's magnificent corals burst into life in an underwater snowstorm by releasing trillions of eggs and sperm into the water in a mass breeding phenomenon, which Sir David Attenborough describes as, quote, one of the greatest of all natural spectacles. This event is also the most important day of the year for coral scientists as they explore innovative methods to scale up reef restoration to protect this natural icon from the increasing impacts of climate change. To boost the numbers of coral babies produced from this year's spawning, a team from the Australian Institute of Marine Science is for the first time training Cairns and Port Douglas marine industries, including tourism, on how to use innovative coral larvae seeding techniques known as coral IVF. This overnight mission to capture millions of corals' eggs and sperm in specially designed floating larval pools is set up in 2 different locations in the region, aiming to support the reef's natural regeneration process. So what they basically do is they set up these relatively small floating pontoons that collect the eggs and the sperm, and they then transport them to an ideal location, which is perfect pH, perfect temperature, all that kind of stuff. So it gives those ones, they leave a heck of a lot more in the water just to do it naturally, but these ones that they actually capture, it just gives them the best chance of success, and then they replant them when they are more developed. Scientists estimate that coral IVF boosts successful coral fertilization rates by 100-fold, raising the chances from 1 in a million in natural settings to 1 in 10,000 through this innovative technique. And the trick is to get it at the right time, because coral spawning wasn't discovered until 1982 at Magnetic Island, and they tend to only do it at one particular time, and they say that it generally occurs in the outer reefs of sort of Cairns and Port Douglas 2 to 6 nights after the November full moon, and when water temperatures are about 27 or 28 degrees Celsius. So very specific range, and of course they just have to be on the ready all that time, just in case, just to help out. But yeah, it's a very cool phenomenon. Scuba divers who use personal locator beacons, or PLBs, are being urged to take part in a consultation on a Coastguard proposal to make search and rescue response faster and simpler should they go missing at sea, and then to ensure that their own devices are registered. The Marine and Coastguard Agency, or MCA, is putting forward an update that would bring PLBs under the same registration requirements that currently only apply to emergency position indicator radio beacons, or EPIRBs, as used on some boats. PLBs broadcast a location on the same 406 MHz frequency as the bigger EPIRBs, but they're designed to be worn on the body rather than kept on a vessel or a life raft, and they are always manually activated. So I have one with me, and it's just this little device, and should the worst happen, you surface and either the currents whip you away from the shoreline, or you can't find your boat, then you pop it open, the little antenna springs out, you push a button, and it just broadcasts your location into a certain range. But this new change would require divers and others to register their current and any new PLBs with the MCA free of charge. That's always a worry with some of these EPIRBs and PLBs, that you have to pay for a yearly subscription or something, or you pay to register it. But no, they're saying no, in the interest of safety, we're going to make it all free. If they are to be used in any maritime environment, they kind of want them registered, ranging from sea and coast to rivers and lakes, because you can use them for anything from sailing to stand-up paddleboarding, all that kind of stuff, as well as scuba diving, and they just kind of want a register, as they always do. Registration means that when a PLB is activated, the Coast Guard can use the details to identify, verify, and locate the person in distress, and it says send help more quickly and effectively in an emergency. Quoting the UK Distress and Security Beacon Registry Manager Linda Goulding, spending just 15 minutes registering a PLB online could make all the difference to being found and recovered safely from a life-threatening situation. Simply register any existing 406 MHz PLB and any new ones that you buy in future on our customer self-serve webpage, as people currently do with their EPIRBs. Make sure that you keep your registration up to date to ensure that search and rescue teams can find you in an emergency. I presume there's more to this, but I don't really get why they need you to register it to ensure that search and rescue teams can find you in an emergency. I don't see why registration would make that any difference. It's just, no, this is the particular person who owns this PLB. Anyway, the package of updates also reflects changes in technology and extends registration obligations to various types of watercraft, in formal terms updating registration requirements for EPIRBs and introducing new registration requirements for PLBs, meaning replacing the merchant shipping EPIRB registration regulations from 2000 with the merchant shipping EPIRB and PLB registration radio communications amendment regulations 2025. People are being asked to respond to the consultation no longer than the 30th of January 2025, and I'll pop a link down in the description below so that you can check that out. It'll take you to the gov.uk website, consultation on the merchant shipping EPIRBs, and yeah, it's just a lot of PDFs and stuff, and feedback and response forms for you to fill out. The body of a scuba diver who went missing off Cornwall on the 22nd of September has been found on a beach about 15 kilometres from his last known location. The man has now been identified as Andrew McKnight, described as a highly qualified diver and instructor. McKnight, who was 76 from St Austell, had been diving east of St Anthony Head near Falmouth when he was reported as not having returned to the dive boat just after midday. A major search and rescue operation failed to locate the then unidentified diver, but on the 8th of December his body was spotted washed up on Port Holland Beach. Quoting a statement from the McKnight family, Andy was a highly qualified diver and dive instructor, and his death has come as a great shock to all who knew him. He was a much-loved husband, father and grandfather, and he will be deeply missed by all of his family. We would like to express our heartfelt thanks to the Southwest diving community, Devon and Cornwall Police, the RNLI, the Coastguard, and all others who gave their time to search for him over the past 11 weeks. James Blake Jimmy Blee, the man behind the cocaine-smuggling plot that saw a Brazilian rebreather die and another go on the run in Australia in 2022, has been sentenced and jailed for a maximum of 11 years and 3 months. The sentence was passed on the 26th of November after Blee had pleaded guilty to illegally importing cocaine and smuggling the 2 Brazilian divers into the country. Blee, who's 64, a former superyacht tour operator from Queensland, was appearing before Judge Troy Anderson at the District Court of New South Wales, which is Australia's biggest trial court. The narcotics were imported in the hull of a bulk carrier that docked in the port of Newcastle in May 2022. Blee, who's from Cairns, had arranged for Brazilian divers Bruno Borges Martin, who was 31, and Joni Fernandes de Silva, who was 32, to be smuggled into Darwin in Australia's Northern Territory by boat from Indonesia before having them driven south to Newcastle. Blee, himself a scuba diver, had bought dive gear worth 12,000 Australian dollars, including a closed-circuit rebreather for the men, before realising that they were not trained on how to use it. Blee had trained them himself on 2 separate occasions at Warner Bays and Swansea. It was stated by national press reporting on the court's proceedings. On the 19th of May, Blee had taken the men to Newcastle so that they could retrieve the drugs. One package was recovered, but police later found a second package containing 42 1-kilogram bricks of cocaine washed up in the port alongside the body of Borges Martin. Da Silva was reported on CCTV cameras but was never traced. It is thought that he might have got away with some of the cocaine. Blee was caught later whilst trying to escape to Singapore. The judge noted that the diver's death could not be blamed on Blee. He also made clear that Blee had not sourced the drugs or secreted them onto the vessel, but had been contracted to extract them, for which he had expected to be paid 300,000 Australian dollars. The plan had been suggested to him in Indonesia, where much of his yachting work was carried out. According to the judge, Blee's nefarious plan had been motivated less by greed than by the desire to save a business that had been severely affected by the COVID pandemic. The sentence for drug importation includes a non-parole period of 7 years and 3 months, but with time already served, Blee will be eligible to apply for parole by November 2029. The sentence includes a maximum 12 months imprisonment for people smuggling. Blee's son, James, who is 23, is on bail awaiting trial after pleading not guilty to one count of aiding and abetting his father in the importation of drugs and to another dealing with more than $100,000 from the proceeds of crime. So yeah, I remember reporting on this when it happened, and yeah, the police well know, because of course it's sure there are lots of like small hiding places in cargo ships, and people thought, hey, well, like customs and police, they search those in the dry section, but on the outside there are like little sections where you can secrete things as long as it's in a pretty tough and watertight container. We can just hide them on the outside, and police are aware of them as well, and they send divers down to check on them. And from my recollection, they'd found them, and they were just kind of waiting to see if what was going to happen, who was going to like try and come and collect them. And they found one chap, the one guy who died, and then they found the second bag of drugs still on the ship, and everyone else like tried to flee, but they were later found. So yeah, if you're thinking about like scuba diving to collect drugs, don't, because the police are well aware of that, and they know of every trick under the book, including closed circuit rebreathers. And yeah, if you're thinking about trying out a closed circuit rebreather with no training, don't, because a lot can happen, and they can be very wily creatures. There was another news story about a sex offender who had been sentenced as well, but it involved minors, so I don't really want to talk about that. New dive equipment, I don't remember seeing anything exciting this week. So let's jump into some Ask Mark questions, or just general questions on the YouTube channel. Michael or Michelle Benet. But aren't you supposed to place a small tube in the wrist sleeve to let air going in and out of the dry gloves? Yeah, that was on the how do you deal with thick neoprene gloves. Yeah, so if you have dry gloves, then you have a ring system, but in most cases you still have a cuff seal from your dry suit, and because the air space around your hand is now effectively a sealed airspace, it's going to be affected by compression at depth, so they like vacuum seal your hands. So what you have is, usually with dry glove ring systems, they give you some small silicone like capillary tubes that are about, I don't know, a millimeter across, and you just tuck that underneath your cuff seal, and it allows some air from inside of your dry suit to go into the glove. So if you do feel that your hand is getting like vacuum sealed inside of it, you just like put your hand up in the air, and then the air in your sleeve just goes up into the glove, and it just kind of gives you some space, which is a really nice feeling. The only downside to that is because you are breaking that cuff seal. Should it flood, then you can get some water to trickle in up your sleeve, so to be careful with that. I also keep some sections of paracord, just because I have a lot of paracord knocking around, because those capillary tubes, they do disappear. If you drop them, they don't make any noise, so they do disappear over time, and a bright red piece of paracord is easier to spot than a transparent silicone piece of tubing. But yes, you do need them, especially if you're diving like below 10 meters. Mr. Chris Scarleton, any tips for those Canadian summers? Donning a dry suit with 2 layers of thick undergarments for water that's 5 degrees Celsius when it's 32 degrees Celsius at the surface. It's the worst. I like to soak my hood in the cold water before kitting up, so at least I have something keeping my head cool. But even then, it's a race to get kitted up and in the water before heat stroke takes you down. Yeah, we used to call it boil in a bag. Because we had a training pool at our dive center that we kept at 30-something degrees Celsius. So because we had like a lot of tri dives, a lot of sort of kids training and things, you'd be in there for long periods of time and just in like a rash vest and board shorts. So didn't want to get cold. But when you had to do like dry suit testers, that was tough because even the changing rooms were hot. So you'd like get ready outside, hop in through the door, and then jump in the pool. It wasn't too bad, but yeah, it's kind of, again, just plan everything out. Have your mask and fins somewhere convenient. Make sure that your BCD is all set up so that as soon as you zip up, you can just bing bang bosh straight in the water as quickly as possible if there's any like dilly-dallying. Also, if you're like me and you're very quick to kit up, don't kit up first. Just read the room, just see what everyone else is doing, and see how quickly they get kitted up. Try to be the last to finally do up that zipper. Otherwise, breathable dry suits are quite nice for that. I have a breathable dry suit, and touch wood, it does make it a bit more comfortable when you're on the surface if you're spending time still zipped up. But yeah, it's mainly about planning ahead, making sure that everything's like as smooth as possible. And if you want to get in the water, just say, hey, I got to get in the water. Shaduvac asks, I've actually answered this one on Ask Mark, and I don't think I've edited it yet, but it should be going up like next week or something. Does a primary donate need to not be the yellow regulator color? Can you change the color of the purge button exhausts on the XL4 Plus? I can't find anywhere that sells them. So your primary donate can be whatever color you want. The yellow really is for like an octa or an alternate that sits on your hip so that it stands out a bit better. But you can dive with it in your mouth as a primary if you want. The only like downside to it is that most octos are set up in the factory to be a little bit stiffer to breathe from than a like traditional like black primary, because it's designed to sit on the hip, and if you jump in without anything like on the mouthpiece, it's more likely to free flow. So they set them up just an incy bit stiffer, so they're less likely to free flow. So all you have to do is just take it into your Apex Service Center and say, hey, can you just adjust this, because I plan to use it as a primary. But there's no like regulations or anything about like what color your primary should or shouldn't be. The closest that we have is that like the green and yellow ones should be used for higher concentrations of oxygen, but it mainly comes down to like cosmetic preference, really. As far as changing the color of the purge button, especially on the XL4, you just twist the cap up. Well, a technician should really undo that and swap that over. It's mainly cosmetic. The reason that you can't find anywhere that sells that part online is that a lot of parts are like service parts. I think they deem them, or that's like the term, and it's kind of the manufacturer saying, oh hey, we don't really want the general public to be fitting these parts, because there is a chance that they could do it wrong and like affect how their regulator works. So you can still get hold of them, but it has to be done through a dealer, and chances are the dealer will insist on fitting it for you. It's just one of those things. It's like how we can't buy service kits, like official service kits, so that people can't service their own regulators. It's kind of nice for the dive center, because it encourages divers to go back into the dive center and give them some custom, because otherwise your local dive center is just going to go under. And yeah, it just helps like people who think they know what they're doing. What is it, the Dunning-Kruger effect? They know enough to change an O-ring, but not to actually set up a set of regulators, because they haven't been officially trained to. It just prevents them from hurting themselves, because they bought an official service kit and they did it all themselves, but actually no, the regulator fails during use. So it just insists that those kind of parts get fitted by your dive center. So it's kind of a yes and no question. It can be done. I wouldn't really bother, to be honest. I'd just rock the yellow and yeah, just go to your dive center and say, hey, I want to use this as a primary. Can you just like lighten it up a little bit so it's the worker breathing isn't affected, basically. Young 007 says, I'm heading to the Bahamas on the Aquacat liveaboard. How do you all do tips? How much money do you bring for tipping? What's the custom? I think it's like the bare minimum is 10% of the cost of the trip. Fancier trips, because I think the Aquacat is quite fancy, that changes to like 15%, maybe even 20% if you're feeling generous. But how it's, I mean, most liveaboards that I've ever been on, there's like towards the end of the cruise, there are a couple of envelopes, one for the crew, one for the dive guides, and yeah, you just put in as much as you like. It's weird. We don't have a huge tipping culture here in the UK, so it's very foreign to me. You tip for some things, but there's no like requirements. And it's funny that a lot of the like chip and pin, the payment things nowadays, they'll flash up, oh, would you like to add like gratuity or a tip or anything? And the staff will actually like X and cancel through it. They're like, no, don't worry about any of that. I think that's just kind of a British thing. I don't know what it's like around the world with those things. I'm hearing that they're becoming much more prevalent. But yeah, as far as dive boats, I think in general, bare minimum is like 10%, and but if you have a good time, then of course you tip more. It's one of those personal things, but they try to keep it as anonymous as possible. It's like a communal tip, so that you're not going to get any like judgment or anything. But yeah, just bring cash, and yeah, you should be fine. Jan Olaf Harnvoll asks, does the Sunto Ocean computer activate automatically when it hits the water? Yes and no. This is quite an interesting one, and a clever thing that that Sunto and I presume Garmin and all those kind of multi-sport computers had to figure out. So with dive computers, before we had all of these fancy multi-sport computers, we just reached the stage where it was pretty common for every dive computer to have water activation, so that as soon as your computer hits the water, it would wake up, go into the previous set dive mode, and you would just continue. Previously, you would have to literally wake up your dive computer and like do all the settings and things, and whilst it was still awake, go on the dive. With the like Sunto Ocean and the Garmin Descent computers, now that they have like swim and snorkeling features, they had to get a bit more clever, because you can't just have, as soon as you like touch water, go into scuba mode, because someone might just be going for a swim. So what Sunto did is there's a setting in the settings menu where you can set a like scuba depth. And as soon as it reaches, I think it's 1.2 meters off the top of my head, like as default, as soon as it hits that depth, it then enters scuba mode. And whatever mode that you had previously set it to. So if you previously set it to like nitrox 30 or whatever, it would just go, okay, you're breathing single cylinder nitrox 30. That's how you last set me up. I'm assuming that's what you're diving on. So of course it's important to do all those kind of settings before the dive. And you can change that setting to make it a little bit deeper or a little bit shallower. But I'd still, with those kind of multi-sport computers, I'd set it up first, like the older versions of dive computers, make sure that it's ready for that dive ahead, and then jump in. But it's kind of a yes, but it's a bit more complicated. It does automatically switch to dive mode when you hit the water. But yeah, it's a bit more complicated than that. And I'll leave it at that because the podcast is getting pretty long at this point. So yeah, links to everything that I've spoken about are going to be down in the description underneath this video. And remember to head over to our website, divernet.com, for the latest scuba diving updates and updates to any news stories. Like, share, subscribe to all that good social media stuff. Thank you for watching, everybody. And of course, safe diving.